Welcome back to the Archaboat Shop, and my name is Rod. So we're working on Elfyn. Last episode I got all the hardware attached for the rudder, so it's in place and the tiller's ready to go. In this episode I'm just going to be finishing up all the tiny little bits of things that need to be done before we can put this baby on a trailer and maybe go for a launch soon. So that's going to be installing the hatches with some fittings that I've ordered in. I'm going to finish up the ridge pole supports with some padding. What else? Leathering the mast and the boom so they're not rubbing on each other. And hopefully just setting up all the rigging so that it actually works. So let's get to it. I've moved Elfyn outside. I've set up the mast. I've set up the sail rig, just kind of temporarily with a bit of string here and there to determine where I need to add some leather to the base of the mast so it doesn't rub on the mast partner through the main seat or thwart. And I also am wrapping a bit of leather around the boom where it will rub against the mast. So I'm just using a piece of leather here from our local supply outlet. And I think, where I've got the tape here, I'm looking, I think probably the best just go with about an even 4 inches wrapped around should do it. On this piece here, I think we're probably going to go 6 inches, but we'll start with the mast first. So I've got a piece of leather here. This is what they call belly leather, 1/8 of an inch thick. So I'm hoping that with one wrap around sewn on, going through the mast partner, that it's not going to be too heavy. Otherwise I'm going to have to take it off and maybe shave a bit of the back of it. We shall see. First step is going to be to cut this leather at 4 inches wide and then see how long it wraps around and cut it to length. For cutting it, I'm just put a new blade into my knife and we're just going to run it through here a few times to get a nice clean cut like that. And that one a little bit crooked, so we're going to end up a little less than 4 inches now. There we go. Just going to check for square on here and we'll make a cut. Then it's back to the mast to see how much length we need. There, and just keep trimming a little bit because once we punch the holes and start to stitch this on, it actually is going to become a bit tighter. Alright, I set out a pattern here and tried to kind of, I don't know if I'll use this one or not. Leather working is not my thing. I mean, I've done a bit of it, but yeah, kind of missed on that hole there and that one there not being in line. But I think that once it's all stitched, I don't think anybody's really going to pay much attention to it. I'll do a little better job of trying to line these up on my line and getting them equally spaced. Punch works very well. It's brand new. Couldn't seem to find my older one. I know I have one somewhere, but it's not something I use often, so somewhere in the house, somewhere in the shop. So those holes should all line up. Now, what kind of thread should we use? Got a couple of options on the thread. I use a lot of this wax nylon thread here in skin-on frame building. I'm concerned of it being a little bit thin for the holes. In other words, might be cutting through. We could go with something a little heavier, but the only one I have is in black, and I wasn't too thrilled about that. We've got similar to this, we've got the black nylon thread. So I picked up this. This is kind of more of a strand type of stuff here, but it's flat. So I was kind of thinking that it might look a little better fed through there and pulled flat. We shall see. Anyways, we're going to try this one. I don't really know how much I'm going to need, so it's heavily waxed, that's for sure. Very sticky stuff here. I'm going to pull off a good measure here and get my needles out. We've got 2 needles. We're going to do a double stitch, weaving its way around similarly than we would do on oars. Now, the thing to consider is where to have the stitching. I'm looking up the top of the mast, and the pulley up the top is in line this way. It's facing sort of vertical, which means that it is going to face the back. I do think that if we have this at the back, or front would be better maybe. That we can play with, I guess, because we can put the main halyard through the pulley either way we want. Point being is that it's going to rub most at the stern portion of the mast as it rests up against the mast partner, and won't touch anything at the front of the mast partner opening. So that's the way we're going to go. And I've already got it through the wrong hole. Good heavens. Anyway, so we come out the bottom of there and through there to the next one. Alright, I have it all stitched on, including a fly. Come on, go on. Must like the smell of the leather. So we got a nice crisscross pattern in there. Now the time is to see if it's going to fit through the mast partner opening, or is the leather too thick. Yeah, a little bit too heavy, that leather. Well, we'll attempt to scrape down a bit of it. I mean, it is possible to do. In fact, there's one area right in here that is much thicker than the rest. Must be some sort of grain in the hide, because it's really hard to scrape this section down. And I have no idea whether this is the right tool, but it seems to be working, so we'll stick with it. I suppose right now I'd prefer it to be a little bit too thin, because if I stitch it all back on and it's still a bit thick, then I gotta cut it back off and go for a third attempt. Then I remembered they actually gave me a little gauge here on my purchase to determine. So right there we are at number 8, and on this piece we are at down below 6, almost to 5. So I'm hoping that will be thin enough, and as it gets a little worn, I think it'll work a little better. Alright, back to stitching. I did manage to get the leather on the mast, and it did fit through the mast partner, and I got the leather onto the boom so it doesn't rub on the mast. So now we can move on to some other parts of the boat before we can deliver this to the customer. The boat's going to get itself a custom cover, and for that I need a couple of supports to support the main mast, which will act as sort of a ridge pole to keep the canvas up high so the water will shed. So I just used a couple of 2x4s, painted it with marine. One fits into the mast partner, into the mast step, and the other fits strapped to the stern seat. And I've got a little bit of foam in there to protect the mast. Now with that in place, I can then call in the company to measure up. For the forward hatch, it's pretty straight simple. We just have a screw out Bexon, so all that needs to be done is set that in, drill some holes, add some bedding compound, and then bolt it in with some stainless steel bolts and nylock nuts. For the aft hatch, which is a little bit of a bigger opening, we've cut out of the actual bulkhead panel, and I'm looking at a nice little pull here is bronze. So that's pretty straightforward. That I'm going to have to put, I'd like to put it up higher, but we're going to have to put it down a bit lower. To hold the cover in place, I purchased a couple of these little latches. These are stainless steel, marine. And the idea is that this portion will get bolted to the bulkhead wall, and then to hold this in place, this will just get turned into there. Now I'm hoping that there's enough pressure with two of these. I'm thinking I'm going to go top and bottom, because I'm thinking that if I go end to end, I may end up just bowing it a little bit. I may end up having to put another two on this side, on the ends as well. I'd have to order those in, but we won't know until we attach all of this, get the gasket in, and then go from there. So let's start. Now this one is a little bit odd in that it obviously gets recessed, but you have this little portion here, so the coal has to be pretty cleanly cut. This, and then a notch cut into there for that to fit in. So we're going to very carefully do that first. I just added some tape. I marked sort of where center line is. Decided to go a little bit higher in the pull. Kind of figured it would be better sort of more towards the top. Then I just drilled a hole, and I had to make this little notch for the pull to swing in and out on. I just used my coping saw, cleaned it all up with a bit of sandpaper so that the fitting would just sit in there nicely. Then it was time to set up all the rigging. So boat's back outside, mast is set up, booms attached, all of these. So here I'm just adding a couple of cleats to the base of the main mast. The cleat on the starboard side will be used to tie off the main halyard, which is raising the boom. And the cleat on the port side is going to be used for the downhaul, which will tighten up the boom when the sail is in the hoisted position. Then we move on to the stern of the boat, and I need to hook up the main sheet. So on the under portion of the stern portion of the boom, I've got a pulley, and I also have a small pulley attached to the bulkhead. And this main sheet will move forward all the way to the center seat, where the sailor will actually be sitting. Now on the rudder and the tiller, there is the little pin that holds the rudder to the tiller arm. So I'm using a little bit of stainless steel cabling. I've crimped it, a couple of loops on the end, added the shrink wrap, and then we just drill a hole in the pin and then a hole in the rudder itself, so the pin will always remain attached to the rudder. It's not ever going to get lost. After inserting the brass pull in the hatch cover with some bedding compound and some small bolts, I had a bit of a change of plan or change of mind on this, and the reason is that This is actually not watertight. When this is open, this opening here can allow water in through the area. Now it would never going to allow a lot of water in, so I've removed it and we're going a different route. I took a piece of mahogany 1 inch thick and I routed a slot in it with a plunge router. Then I added a top to it with a piece of another mahogany, so it becomes one piece, and then it becomes a small little finger pull. And then with the finger pull done, coated in a bunch of coats of epoxy, varnishing again. I did add a little block and a little cleat, or sorry, a little pad eye in here, one inside as well, so we've got a leash on it. I did end up putting in 4 of the little hold downs because I felt like I really needed a good amount of pressure all the way around. The gasket inside here is just a simple closed cell foam gasket weather stripping, and this fits in there quite nicely. And then we squish the gasket down, or sorry, we got to get it in place there. We squish the gasket down and hold it in place. Now I may be looking actually to put in a slightly larger gasket. These little turnbuckles actually are a little bit spring loaded, so they can actually be pulled out and then quite in there. There we go. So I don't know how much pressure is needed to keep it on there, but that's certainly enough pressure right now as far as the gasket goes, but I can compress the gasket a bit. All that's left now is the cover and the oars, which have just come in and need to get varnished. We'll add the leather to those, and this project is ready for launch. And with that, that's going to conclude the build of Elfyn. So I want to thank everybody for sticking around and watching this series. I don't know what's going to come up in the shop next, but the next video, I have talked to the customer and we are going to take it out for a bit of a launch and get some video of it at least being rowed, maybe under sail if we have enough wind at the local pond. Thank you very much for watching.